All right. Welcome, everybody, to what is episode 9 of Sharks Talk 916. It's going to be our last episode for a little while. We're going to do a little bit of a season wrap-up and look forward to next season. With me, or back with me, I guess, is Nolan Torrey. I couldn't get my friend from the Blues to sign permanently, so I had to go back to Nolan.
It's probably why they lost that you had a Blues fan on.
It's probably it's all my fault that we lost. Sorry, everyone. I brought a Blues fan on. So just a reminder, Sharks Talk 916 is brought to you by Sports Talk 916. You can find them on Facebook at Sports Talk 916 Network, online at sportstalk916.com, and then on Twitter there's at Sports Talk 916, and we have our own at Sharks Talk 916 account where we tweet random things, usually about hockey, unless I forget which account I'm on, and then sometimes I tweet things that aren't about hockey. So, I think we're used to it, sadly, but another disappointing into a playoff season. Sharks did not make it past the conference finals, out in six games to the Blues. So let's talk first. We're going to get, I think we're going to spend a lot of today on the future, but let's talk at least a little bit about the end of that, the playoffs and kind of what you saw, what went wrong. What did the Sharks not do that caused us to lead to defeat? So why don't you start and I'll go.
Well, there's a couple of factors. I think the main one is the Blues, right from game one, were out there trying to kill people physically. Seemed like they had targeted Karlsson from the first game, which sure enough, that worked out, and he went down and halfway through game 5, not even. So I thought the physical play in the series, in the first few games, the Sharks handled it fine, but keep in mind, coming off 7 games versus Vegas, 7 games with Colorado, they were probably already beat up pretty good, and from what we've heard from the Walker cleanout interviews, a lot of guys were battling things, which that's always the case, but it sounded worse than usual. So I think the physical play took its toll. Obviously, the headshots took out Hurdle. Pavelski said it wasn't the headshot that took him out of Game 6. Apparently, he re-aggravated his knee injury from the regular season, which I thought was a little bit strange, but we'll take him at his word. And then, obviously, Karlsson went down as well. So not even just the injuries, obviously, were a huge factor in Game 6. Those guys went out in Game 5, but by the time they went out in Game 5, that game was pretty much already over at that point. So really, the injuries were a one-game issue, but I thought the physical play in general was a huge factor, and it wore them down as the series went on.
Yeah, I agree. I think I actually think they came out most physical that first game, and then after losing, they kind of backed off a little bit and then started picking it back up again. You're right. They targeted Karlsson, which, I mean, I don't blame them. That's what you do. You've got a defenseman on the other side who's a good defenseman, but he's injured. You give him some hits. You see if he can withstand it. I agree with Pavelski, with your take on Pavelski. I don't think it was just the leg. I think he probably did re-injure lower body, but he also had to have had still some issues with concussion, or he took so many head hits that I can't see him. You're muted.
Thank you. I vividly remember the replay on that hit from Pietrangelo in Game 5, and he was immediately woozy on that hit when he got cross-checked in the head. So who knows? Maybe the symptoms went away shortly after that, but I have a hard time believing that there wasn't still a lingering head issue injury there.
Yeah, so I mean, not that we were looking great before Game 6, but losing Pavelski, Karlsson, and Hurdle out of your line, you throw in Gambrell, who I actually think I think he played a hell of a game for a guy who was his second NHL game and first goal, right? I think you throw in 3 guys who haven't really been playing, or at least not played very much in the playoffs. It's going to be a tough win anytime.
Yeah.
There was a kind of a glimmer of hope when it was 2-1. I was starting to get in there. I was starting to get excited, but unfortunately we lost it. I think it sucks because Logan is they call him Couture. I think that he tried so hard that game too. In game 6, I saw multiple times Logan basically try to take the game into his own hands, but I feel like you can only do that so many times before you're everybody knows that's what you're going to do, and you try to isolate him out of it.
Yeah, and you mentioned it at the 2-1 mark in game 6. There was a few opportunities. Logan had the gaping net rebound, which unfortunately the puck hit him in the face and kind of startled him, and he lost track of the puck. He sort of blamed himself after the game for that one. But the moment I don't remember who it was. There was a clear cross-check. I think it was Thornton. Got clearly cross-checked in the corner. Should have been a power play. The Sharks would have been going to the power play down 2-1, which granted their power play was pretty terrible most of the playoffs. They may have been able to tie the game up there, and then shortly thereafter, St. Louis gets a penalty, scores on the power play, and that was pretty much the end of it as far as Game 6 goes.
Yeah, and I think that's not a bad thing to look at the playoffs as a whole, with the exception of the 5-minute major. The power play was horrendous for the Sharks throughout the playoffs. I mean, at best, in its best games, it was average, and in most games, it was way below average.
Yeah, I don't think it ended up being that big of a factor in the conference final just because they got so few power plays. And that kind of takes us naturally to the hand pass call. I remember when that happened, Eddie Olczyk on NBC Sports Network was kind of, it's either him or Keith Jones were saying, hey, this could be a turning point for the Blues and it's going to inspire them. Do you feel like that, Chad, that moment did inspire them, or do you think that had nothing to do with them turning it around? I
think it had two impacts. So one is I do think it inspired them to some extent. I think they feel like they got robbed of a game, and they start to up their physical intensity again after that game. Yeah. And I think that part of that is because of losing the game. And then I think on the other hand, there was less penalties, honestly, on both sides being called. The refs really swallowed their whistles in the last few games.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that part of that is they didn't want to be seen as making another, causing an outcome on another game. And so they just stuffed their whistles in their pockets unless it was something that they thought was egregious or just too obvious to not call. I think in doing that, though, they missed some calls they probably should have made. But like you said, I'm not confident that more power plays would have won us anything, because I'm not confident that our power play would have scored goals.
That's what Justin just said in the chat, basically.
Yeah.
The other thing that shouldn't be lost, right? Okay, the last 3 games of the series, the Sharks scored 2 goals. Obviously, you're not going to win any game scoring 2 goals over 3 games total, but I think that was more so. I mean, a lot of that you can blame on the Sharks, but I think a lot of credit goes to St. Louis for the defensive game they played. It was very difficult to get inside of them. And when you hear the Sharks players talk about when they're playing well, they're always talking about we need to get to the inside, get behind their defensemen. And basically the goal is to be between the defenseman and the goalie inside. And there was no rebound opportunities. There was no second chances. There just wasn't a lot of space out there in general. Their defensive game was probably the best I've seen in a very long time in terms of a playoff series. They just didn't have any room out there to operate and create offense.
Yeah, both when I was watching games, and there were a couple games that I couldn't be home, so I was listening to on the radio. And on the radio, you get a lot more, to me, good analysis of what's happening, because the guys on the radio, you've got Bakes and for some reason I'm drawing a blank, Hedigan, like giving commentaries, and they were both constantly pointing out like we're not in front of the net. And it's not because necessarily they're not trying. It's just they're getting beat. They're getting knocked out from in front of the net. The
Blues have a very large defensive corps, right? Bortuzzo, Boomeister, Pietrangelo, all those guys are big dudes. It was kind of the opposite of Colorado, which had a bunch of small defensemen.
Yeah, and they guard the middle very well, right? They let you take the outside shots. Burns got off a ton of shots, but the problem is there's no one in front of the net to knock him in or to give a deflection. So John, one of the people watching, is saying that Hedican is brutally blunt, and he is. And that's one of the things I like. Listening to the radio makes the game sound totally different than watching on TV. But one thing I like about Hedican is that he calls out the Sharks when they're doing bad things. He calls out the refs when they're not making calls. he's very blunt of just this is how hockey is and this is what they're doing wrong.
That's what I miss about Drew. Drew was always that way.
Yeah, and Hetty was very big on listening to the game 6. He was very big on the Sharks not winning battles in front of the net and not winning battles in that middle area, that the Blues were just able to take it away. And I think that's a huge factor to us not scoring goals. I mean,
yeah, in game 6 in particular, I mean, you just can't come out and get behind 2 goals in a game like that when you're already shorthanded and up against it. I mean, you saw the life sucked out of that team. Once it got 2-0, there was no energy, and then Gambrell scores, and that sparked him for a few minutes, and then once the power play goal happened, it was signed, sealed, and over. So
yeah, and Binnington looked good, and one of the comments Justin says like the reason Binnington looks better is because of the defense in front of him, and I totally agree with that. And we talked about that with Jones throughout the year, that part of why Jones looked as bad as he did was because the defense in front of him was falling apart. But I don't want to take anything away from Binnington, because when we got breakaways and when we didn't have the defense there, he still made saves. He still was in the right position to take away shots. So those two things combined is what wins playoffs, honestly. Like having a good defensive core in front of you and having a good goalie keeps you in the game. Jones tried really hard to keep us in the game, but like you said, if you're going to score 1 goal, it's not going to be enough in the playoffs.
No, anyone who tries to blame that series on Jones didn't watch the series. I mean, I thought he played well enough every single game, and their issue was not creating enough offense. So, to be honest, John, I don't remember the first 2 goals in Game 6. It's all kind of a blur at this point. So I can't speak to that. I'd have to go watch the highlights again. But
if I remember right, the first one was really Jones getting hung out to dry. But there was a couple, even in Game 5, where Karlsson gives one up pretty easily. Jones passes directly to a blue.
That one I remember because I was there. Flew all the way across the country to watch that shit show. But yeah.
I told Nolan he couldn't come to watch games anymore after that.
That goal was huge, though. I mean, because early in Game 5 they were dominating, and I thought, talk about a turning point. If Kane scores 10 seconds into that game when he hits the post, I think the Sharks jump on him that game and probably take Game 5, and that changes the whole course of that series. I thought Kane hitting that post 10 seconds in was, and then Karlsson turns around and turns it over. They get the first goal, and that it shouldn't happen like that. One or two moments shouldn't dictate a game, but it certainly seemed like that was the case.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like posts were.
Oh God, the Sharks had a lot of posts that series.
Yeah, so many. Like Hurdle, Kane, everybody was hitting posts. I mean,
Kane had 2 in Game 5 alone.
Yeah, and we talked about Kane overall being a disappointment in the playoffs. He seemed to get better during that series to me, but he still wasn't able to capitalize and actually score a goal. And Hurdle kind of unfortunately disappeared during that series as well. So yeah, I think you're right. I think defense is a big part. Someone made the point, I missed whose comment it was, that without Pavelski, we don't have a net front presence. And I think that's a problem with some of our other forwards is he can't be the only one going and getting in front of the net, right? Hurdle especially.
Hurdle's the other one, yeah.
Yeah.
Timo, and even Nyquist gets there for a lot of tips. I mean, he's not going to get to rebounds, but he's typically there for tips.
That was one of the things I tweeted multiple times was about rebounds. So in both this series and the series before, there were a lot of rebound opportunities that I feel like we just missed because no one was there. So the goalie makes a good stop, but there's an open net and a rebound, and the puck just sits there. They're able to clear it out. So I think we need to get more bodies, always having someone get in front of the net and just be there to knock one in. Which we'll talk a little bit about when we talk about free agency and kind of what we need for next year. I think that'll be part of what we talk about as well. So what else you got for the playoffs?
Somebody mentioned early on in the comments about the power play discrepancy in that series, and I saw a stat. I don't remember it offhand now because I never wrote it down, but ever since that Game 3 hand pass goal, I think the Blues had like a 3-to-1 power play ratio against the Sharks, which they carried play, so you can make that argument they earned more power plays, but I don't think it's a coincidence that the power play disparity was quite apparent after that game 3.
Yeah, I didn't think game 6 was as ridiculous. Game 5 was ridiculous to me. I mean, I think that we had one power play, I think, all of game 5, and it was in the third period after the game was over.
Yeah.
And we took a ton of penalties. I mean, we took a bunch in the third period that were frustration penalties. But there were definitely hits that should have been called in that game. And the fact that they didn't get called kind of set the tone for that game and game 6 as far as, I mean, they were just, Hetty kept saying, hey, in game 6, he's like, every time there's a face-off, they interfere. There's an interference every time there's a face-off, and no one's calling it. But that means the Sharks need to go down on the other end and do the same thing and say, hey, if you're not going to call this, then we're going to do it as well. And I don't know if they weren't willing because they were afraid that they would get called for it. But it seems like, you and I play softball, and there's times when you change kind of how you hit based on how they're calling pitches. I think to some extent the Sharks have to do the same thing. If they're not calling certain things penalties, then you need to be willing to go out there and do the same thing to kind of make it more even.
But I don't know if you're going to change your game. I think you just got to play through it, which they did for the most part. It just made it more difficult. But I don't know. There's not much you can do. And the refs are putting the whistles away. They're going to put them away. And I don't know if you can really do much about it other than just keep playing and don't get frustrated by it.
But I definitely think a physical game where the refs aren't blowing the whistle is always disadvantaged Sharks. There's very few teams that I feel are less physical than us. And definitely at the playoff level, most of the teams are more physical than we are. So I think if you're saying you've got a physical game where refs aren't blowing the whistle, then I mean, how many Sharks are really going out there making hits? I saw some complaints about EK sticking out, or not EK. Well, EK, the other EK, King sticking out some knees, and definitely Burns tried to lay some hits, and Timo laid some hits, but overall, we just aren't as physical as a team like that.
Yeah, no, we always feel like the team that's being attacked physically, not the other way around. So.
And that brings up a good question as to moving forward. So what do you think of the Blues-Bruins matchup? Are the Blues going to be able to hang, or is it just too much?
Well, I mean, if the Bruins weren't on a 10-day layoff, then I think the Bruins win that series pretty easily. In fact, I think it's an 11-day layoff. I'm not going to pick the Blues just because I personally cannot ever pick the team that beats the Sharks to go on a win. I just can't do it. I'm too bitter and stubborn to do that. So I think the Bruins will win, but I do think the layoff will be a big issue for Boston. And if they do lose, I think that will be the reason the layoff. It's going to take them 1 or 2 games to sort of find their legs. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing that they start at home. Maybe it's a good thing because you can win with not your best effort, because you are at home, but we'll see.
So I don't know what I'm going to say. I'll pick the Blues. I'll probably root for the Blues just because I hate the Bruins so much. They're just, and I can't bring myself.
Teams lose, that would be my preference.
Yeah, I can't bring myself to root for a team that has Marchand on it. So like maybe if he gets taken out early on, then I can switch who I'm rooting for. But I think that Boston's more physical, and their guys have a lot of talent. I mean, that's kind of the complaint I had last time we had the show when we were talking about Marchand, is that a guy who's actually fairly talented out there still feels the need to go out and be, the guy that he is. And I feel like it's just
he's arguably a top 20 NHL player if he plays with his head on straight.
Like I've never seen anybody who is as good as him that acts the way he acts, right? Has the antics that he has. It's usually the guys who can't play that well that go out there and do this stupid crap. So I hate him, and I just don't like the Bruins, so I'm going to root for the Blues.
I don't like Char. I feel like he gets away with so many dirty hits because of his size. They're like, oh, well, he's at head level. You don't get to cross-check a guy in the head just because you're tall.
That's the argument on Twitter every time he does a head hit, right? Is, well, he can't help it. That's where your head is. And it's like,
bullshit. Yeah.
Come on. Anyways, it's funny because I know a lot of Sharks fans who are like, go Bruins. I think if you actually watch the series, you might change that opinion as the series goes on.
Yeah.
As you watch the Bruins play, you might go, you know what? Screw those guys. I hate them.
Yeah, there's probably going to be a few headshots both ways if the Blues keep up with how they played against the Sharks. So it could get ugly. But definitely, I mean, DeBoer said himself, those are the two most physical teams left in the league. I don't know whether that's a coincidence or not. That's up for debate, but there's no doubt going into the playoffs, those were the two biggest and strongest teams. So.
Well, it's funny because I think if we had Blues earlier on, I don't think it would have been as much of an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
If we don't have 14 games under our belt already and multiple injuries already, I think it's a different scenario. Yeah. But that's kind of the way that, I mean, that's a factor in the playoffs, right? Is how long does it take you to get to the next round? What shape are you in when you get there? It's all like one thing Steve said is he's not disappointed. He's just I forget the term he used, but I'm not disappointed in the team. I think the team played hard. I think they really gutted it out sometimes, including like 2 Game 7s that they put it all out there to stay in. I'm not disappointed. I'm just, as usual, I'm tired of.
You're always disappointed, right? But I wouldn't say there's not as much anger because you don't feel like. Well, it's always a missed opportunity, but you don't feel like they, pissed it away or choked or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't. There wasn't the reverse sweep or any of the like first round knockout. Any of the things that we've seen previously, where this team went in and they made it all the way to the conference final, and they took that to 6 games despite the shape they were in. So it's bittersweet. That's what Steve said. It's hard to see such a talented team not make it, because I think to some extent you always go, well, if this team doesn't make it, then how do we ever put together a team?
Well, and then they cut away and showed Joe Thornton's reaction on the bench, and it's like, oh man, that was hard to watch.
And I made a comment because I think that what's funny is I think Joe, if you ask him what he's disappointed in, he wouldn't say that he didn't get a cup. He would say that the team didn't get there. And I think that's what I love about Jumbo is I think to some extent he takes a little bit of that on himself. He didn't have the best playoff series, especially when you look at how good of a season he had. His line kind of dropped off in the playoffs.
Did you hear in his interview, the lockout cleaner, he said he pulled his groin the first shift of the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah.
How crazy is that? I mean, the first shift of a series, you pull your groin. That's got to suck.
Yeah, the injuries, it's funny because we didn't get a full injury report, right? We're just kind of getting...
No, the last 2 or 3 years they've gone away from that just because they don't want to be seen as an excuse, but yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of trickling in as people report their own injuries or there's questions. Like Pavs was clearly not going to play. The whole game time decision was a scheme, right?
Afterwards it was nowhere close. But I think both DeBoer and Doug Wilson described his injuries as a car wreck. But he had 5 or 6 injuries going on. So
let's use that as a transition. Both Joes are a good transition into this. So going to the offseason, and the question becomes, what do the Sharks look like next year? There's a couple really big questions, but then overall there's just cap space in general. So what do you want to...
Yeah, so I'll kind of paint the landscape here. So estimated cap space, the Sharks have essentially $25 million in cap space with 15 guys under contract currently. So the full roster is 23, but see, that's 7 or 8 guys they have to spend $25 million on. We're going to go through each unrestricted free agent and restricted free agent and talk about some of the guys that may be on the trade block as well. So we'll go through each free agent, kind of whether Chad and I would try to keep them or whether we would let them go and what we think about each situation. So I guess we'll start with Erik Karlsson. Obviously, there's a lot of factors with him. I think the biggest question is his health. In his clean-out interview, he seemed pretty confident he was going to be healthy going forward. Obviously, he needs to say that personally. I don't know if I buy it myself. And I ran a poll on my Twitter account over the weekend, just asking if Sharks fans even wanted Karlsson back. let alone, will he return? Just do you want him back? And I thought it was interesting. It was pretty split down the middle. I think it was like 58% wanted him back, 42% did not. So I guess that's the first question, Chad. Do you even want him back?
No, I voted twice for no. Once as me and once as SharksTalk916. No, I don't want him back for a couple reasons. One, I think the type of injury he has, it's too hard to judge if he's going to be back to 100%, especially with how often he re-injured it over the course of this season. Second, his defense really fell off at the end, and I'm guessing part of that's because of the injury. Like his offense was still there, he's still shooting, but his ability to get back and his ability to make defensive plays just didn't seem to be there.
Yeah, ability will kill you far more on defense than offense.
Yeah. And I think that the amount he thinks he deserves, and arguably the amount he deserves when he's 100%, is more than we can afford to pay him if we want to keep a team together. So I don't want him back, not because I have anything against him. I just think for the cost, he's not the right person to have here. And I don't think we do re-sign him. I just think the money, with the injury, the money is too much for us to.
Well, that's the big question for you, is the money. I don't know how much he's going to get. If he had gotten through this season and had one of his regular seasons, he'd probably be looking at 10 or 11 million per, max contract, 7 years outside of San Jose, 8 years for San Jose. So I don't know where he's going to end up salary-wise. I'm sure there are some teams that will still throw big money at him because they're desperate. And the other question is, I don't know where his head is at. I don't know if he's even interested remotely in returning to San Jose. If he's not, then it's a moot point, and it doesn't really matter, the money, because he doesn't want to come back. But if we assume he's at least remotely interested in returning, I would take him back at the right price, but what that price is going to be, I don't know. I wouldn't want to pay more than $8.5 to $9 million per year, and that's making more than Burns is. Granted, Burns signed 2-3 years ago, but if he wants over $9 million, pushing $10 million, then I think you cut your losses and move on.
Yeah, so I think that so a couple things. I think that some of his motivation is he wants to be on a winning team. That's clearly one thing that he wants. He wants a chance at the Stanley Cup, right? I've heard some rumors and read some things that his wife is interested in getting closer to home, which is Ottawa. So that puts him probably on the East Coast in the U.S. And then you start to ask what teams out there can afford him. What teams would he want to play for? I don't think New York, because
no, I keep hearing that rumor. It just doesn't make sense to me because they're rebuilding. Like
maybe the Islanders, but definitely not the Rangers. I mean, why would you play for a team that has no hope really in making it to the playoffs? Shouldn't say that. No hope in really being a Stanley Cup contender, I don't think, next season.
Not anytime soon, yeah.
I've heard Florida too, which I guess is technically closer for her. Tampa. Tampa is what I heard.
Tampa, he's got a lot of friends, and obviously they're a great team. So the biggest issue with Tampa is they have no cap space, so they would have to clean a lot of guys out to make room for him. But if it's possible, most people assume that's his number one choice. So.
But I mean, people read a lot into what he, like his thank you that he tweeted, but I think that's kind of just boilerplate what you write your first time in that city.
Yeah, I mean, Kane wrote a very similar post the year before, and he re-signed, so I wouldn't read into it too much. There was also some Instagram live videos from his wife where they were at a final dinner with the other Sharks wives, and she was posting heartbreak emojis like, this is the final dinner, but that could just be the final dinner before they go away for the offseason, because they all separate during the offseason. I do want to comment on something Steve just said about, I hope the Sharks dump him as opposed to the other way around. Doug Wilson's a professional. He's not going to come out and say that either way, right? They're going to keep this close to the vest. So we'll probably never know as far as that goes, but I would not be surprised at all if that is the case, but the Sharks have decided to move on and not pursue him.
Yeah, I think it comes out mutual, honestly. I think that they get into a room, they talk about it. I think the Sharks aren't willing to pay him what he wants to stay. He's not that interested in staying, and it just kind of becomes a parting of ways.
Mutual parting there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to feel bad necessarily about the outcome. But it's funny because I've changed this, I don't know, 3 or 4 times I've changed my opinion on this throughout the season, right?
Yeah.
At first I thought there's no way he's just playing so terrible. And then, he's great again. He finally found his legs. I think
he's a roller coaster.
Yeah, it's been tough. And I think to some extent that's also a reason is that roller coaster of a season he's had. It makes it hard to say, let's pay him a bunch of money to keep him.
Well, and I think that's why he may want to leave, just get a fresh start. And he's already got a lot of baggage in San Jose between the injuries and how, I might say, played poorly in the playoffs, but he was on the ice for a lot of goals. And it was just a rough year for him all around. I can see him wanting to just kind of wipe that from his memory and start over.
Yeah, and again, I think for me the biggest thing if I'm Doug Wilson is, can I afford to take that chance? And I don't think you can. We're not with, as we move down the list, not with the guys you have that you're going to lose if you sign. I mean, I don't think there's any way Karlsson signs and Pavelski signs. I don't think there's any way you get that deal.
It's possible, but they would have to pretty much say goodbye to everyone else that's not already signed and possibly ditch a few guys that are signed.
And if I have to choose between those two, I think you choose Pavelski over choosing Karlsson.
Well, let's get into that. So Pavelski's next on our list. What are your initial thoughts on his situation?
So we talked a little bit about this before the game. I think it's tough. So I think his age is going to be part of what makes it difficult. And how well he played is going to make it difficult. So you have two separating factors. You have, if he's a 30-goal scorer every season, then he's worth more than he's getting paid to play hockey. But do you give him 3 years, or I can't see you going over 3 years because he's 35 now.
3, I think, is the most the Sharks would offer him.
So I think they offer him 3 years, and then it just becomes a matter of how much. And I think he's gonna have to take a loyalty cut to stay in the Sharks. I think that's the only way he stays here. I can't. If I were him, I wouldn't take less than Evander Kane gets paid.
So
and I don't know.
$7 million per year.
Yeah, I wouldn't take less than $7 million, and I don't know if the Sharks are willing to take that cap hit to keep 35-year-old Joe Pavelski, who has multiple head injuries and a leg injury and whatever else at the end of this season, to keep him on the Sharks.
Ironically, I'm not so worried about his injuries, just because he's a tough son of a bitch, and he seems to battle injuries every year. And the injuries he has, I think he'll be fine. Granted, concussions can be a long-term issue, but I don't anticipate that'll be the case for him. But this is a really hard one for me because on one hand, you've got the sentimental aspect of your captain, the guy who just laid his life on the line, literally, it felt like, in the playoffs, coming off his best season in a long time. So, I mean, all the check boxes as far as would you want this guy back? Yes. But he's 35 years old, and they're in a cap-tight situation. If I remove the sentimental aspects of it, I would let it go personally. But I don't know that Doug Wilson has that in his heart to look at it purely objectively and ignore everything he's done for the franchise.
Yeah, I think you're going to have a Marlowe situation. I think you're going to have he's going to get an offer to stay that's going to be decent, but not necessarily the best offer he can get, right? And then it comes down to he's got to decide whether he likes playing here enough to stay, or whether he is more interested in going somewhere else for 3 years, making more money, and possibly having a chance at a cup. I mean, not that he doesn't have one with the Sharks, but there's plenty of good teams that wouldn't mind having Joe Pavelski on their team. So I don't think he takes more pay to go play for, the Rangers. I think,
if the Sharks are reasonably close to where other teams are at, then I think he'll return. But I also wonder too if there's any sort of bad blood or feeling underappreciated, considering they haven't negotiated with him at all this season compared to other guys that they've re-signed before they hit free agency. Granted, those guys were younger, Burns, Vlasic, Jones, Couture, Kane. Those guys were all younger, so it makes more sense. But I don't know if
know.
there's any animosity there where he's like, okay, am I not appreciated that you haven't even considered signing me until the end of the season? But
Maybe, but you have to also think about it as it may be a smart play for him not to negotiate before the end of the season, because if he's trying to negotiate when Erik Karlsson's still a possibility, that puts him in a worse spot than if he's negotiating when Erik Karlsson's not a possibility.
yeah, I think that's probably why they did hold off. So.
I actually think he's in a better position now than he was in, a few months back to negotiate for more pay. But listening to him, I feel like there's already been some talk, and he has some desire to stay here because he said he thinks he'll be here next year, and it didn't seem like I'm just telling the fans I think I'll be here next year. It seemed like he seemed to think he would be here next year, but then when they're like, well, is there anything?
They said dotting the I's, crossing the T's. He goes, no, we're not at that point yet. So it was more of a, yes, I absolutely want to be here. Not quite a Joe Thornton level because Thornton is either San Jose or elsewhere, which we'll talk about next. But, he definitely wants to be back. It's just a matter of how much are the Sharks willing to pay to keep him.
And I honestly think that the Jumbo's decision may impact Pavelski's decision too. We thought that was going to be a bigger deal with Marleau.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't end up being enough to keep Marleau around. But I do think if Jumbo resigns, that makes Pavelski a little more willing to take a cut to stay around. Just because who doesn't want to play with Jumbo if you've been playing with Jumbo?
I don't think it'll impact him either way personally, but I could be wrong on that. Just because, not that the Joes aren't close, but Marleau and Thornton had a pretty special relationship, and that was kind of a unique situation. But to wrap a bow around Pavelski, I do think he comes back. Personally, I would be tempted to let him go, but I do think they work it out, and he probably returns on a 3-year deal somewhere in the 6.5 range if he's willing to take that.
Yeah, if I have to bet, I'd say he's back for 3 at I'd say 6.5 or 7. I just find it really hard to believe that he doesn't say I want as much as. Especially looking at the way Kane's season, Kane in the playoffs, I find it hard to believe Paz doesn't say I want as much as Kane. But yeah, I think you're right. I think chances are he's back, which then makes the rest of the decisions a little harder, money wise.
So Joe Thornton, this one I think is easy personally. First of all, there's no debate about if he does play next year. He's going to be a Shark. There's no debate about that. So really the question is, does he return or does he retire? That's really the debate.
Yeah, he's basically said as much, right? He says, I'm a Shark. That's if I'm playing, I'll be.
Doug Wilson has pretty much echoed that too, that if he wants to play, we'll have a spot for him. So
yeah, I think that Thornton, I think he takes whatever they offer him to come back. And I think it'll be an amount that would be insulting to Joe Thornton in his prime, but that Joe Thornton's willing to play for because he loves hockey and he loves San Jose. And I think we've talked about this a little bit, but I think he drops down and plays center on the fourth line.
It depends what else they do, but
yeah,
that could definitely turn into his role at some point next year if they find a third line center.
And I don't think there's anything like I know some players would find that insulting. I don't think Joe would find that insulting at all. I think Joe would just enjoy playing on the team and do what he did this season and be a mentor, and do you want the worst guys guarding Joe Thornton on the ice? You want to put your worst lineup against him on the fourth line? No, because he's going to make passes and he's going to, even this season, score goals if you do that. So I think he's back. I think he takes $2-3 million, whatever they give him for a year to stick around.
It's going to be whatever they have left, right? That's pretty much what they've done the last few years. When Marleau left, they ended up having a lot of money left, so they paid him quite handsomely. And then last year, I think ended up around $5 million, which it's kind of funny. People have said, Joe will take whatever he's willing to take. In the last 2 years, he's actually gotten paid well because they didn't end up really needing the money.
Yeah.
But this year, he's going to have to take $2-3 million at most if they're going to squeeze him in.
So
I do think he returns. I don't think he retires. a lot of people looked at his emotions after the series and started to wonder if he's going to retire. But to me, that's more so you just look at it and go, I'm 39 years old. I'm in the conference finals. I don't know if I'm ever going to get another conference finals appearance. Not so much, oh man, this is my last year. It's just you don't get to the conference finals very often, and he knows that. And it's an opportunity that might be the best one he ever gets, the rest of his career. So.
And then what do you think are the chances he signs his contract on his tractor without his shirt on?
So that's probably a 99% chance. But no, he'll come back. I mean, he scored 50 points this year.
Yeah.
With no offseason to train, coming off 2 knee surgeries. I mean, this will be the first offseason in a long time where he's healthy.
He played like he was in his 20s again in some of those games. I mean, he clearly was showing it at the end, his age, but I think the season he just looked great.
I think he gives it at least one more year, and we'll see after next year. But I think he'll be back.
Okay, so moving on. This one's an interesting one because I don't think we agree on this. So Nyquist, what do you think?
I would let him go. I was not impressed whatsoever with what he brought to the team. He's one of those guys to me that he looks good when he's out there, but he doesn't produce. Almost reminds me of Matt Nieto. He's kind of sexy and skates well and dishes around well. His line looks good, but he doesn't scare me. And for as much money as he'll get, and more importantly, as much money as they already have tied up in some of the forwards they have, I don't think they can afford to pay $5-6 million a year for a guy that isn't really critical to the team. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's a necessary piece for them, and I don't think they have the cap space to waste money on a guy that they don't really need.
So I don't necessarily want him back, but I think they try and get him back.
Okay.
And for kind of all the reasons you said is that the way he looks out there, even though he's not scoring, I think that their hope will be, well, he pulls an Evander Kane, right? Like we sign him back and then the next year he scores 30 goals and has a good season. Because I wasn't that impressed with Kane at the end of last season. And we signed that guy back for ridiculous.
Well, you remember when Kane came over from was it Buffalo at the time? I mean, he didn't have a great playoff that year, but the regular season, I mean, he was the Sharks' best player after they traded for him. So
yeah,
Nyquist, I mean, John kind of said it in the chat as I was saying. I mean, he gets a lot of assists, but he had 2 goals in the playoffs, and I mean, even the regular season, I think he had 1 or 2 goals since he came over from Detroit. He's got skill, but again, I don't think he's necessary for what the Sharks already have, and they can spend their money better elsewhere, and they're going to need that money.
I guess that becomes the question too, though, is like, what do you do? He's been, a top 6 since he came over, basically. Right. What do you do if you don't sign him? Who takes that place for $4.7 million or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, that's for Doug Wilson to answer, but but no, I mean, they're gonna have to count on some of their young guys to take another step forward. Both the guys that are already in the lineup and some of the guys with the Barracuda to step in, because they're not going to have cap space to fill every top 9 spot with a veteran player at this point. So,
all right, the next one is the one that breaks my heart. So Jonas Donskoy. I think we both agree he's not coming back.
Yeah, I don't know. I could see them bringing him back just because I don't think he's going to cost much. And he has the potential to be a good top 9 player, but at the same time, he's been a disappointment the last 2-3 years. He's another guy similar to Nyquist where he has a lot of the tools to be successful, but he just hasn't been able to put it together. Granted, different than Nyquist has a long career in the NHL, and it's proven he can be an effective player. Donskoy, still, this is his 3rd full year, I think, in the NHL. He hasn't really established himself. Really, his best year was his rookie year, especially in the playoffs. And the reason we say this is a tough one is because everybody loves Donskoy as a person. He's a great guy, easy to like, never question his work ethic or that his head's in the right place. I mean, the perfect model citizen. It's just he hasn't produced on the ice as consistently as they would like.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at his seasons, honestly, his second season is his worst. So he had 36 points his first season, 17 his second, 32 last season, and then 37 this season. So I don't think he's as inconsistent over the course of a season as like when you just look season to season, he's not inconsistent. But in a season, within the season, he's very inconsistent.
Yeah,
He's very streaky.
40 games without a goal this year.
Yeah, he's just so streaky, and I don't know. I like him. I'd like to keep him because he's a hard worker, even when he's not scoring goals. He's good on defense, even when he's not scoring goals. But I don't know how long you wait for him to mature out of that, right? Like I don't know how much more time you give him to come back. I don't think they sign him because I think they use him. I think they use him in trade deals. Well, I guess
they have to sign him.
I guess they have to sign him for that. Yeah, maybe they.
I mean, they could trade his rights, but typically they're trading somebody's rights. You're only going to get like a 6th or 7th round pick.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do.
We didn't talk about that with Karlsson, though. It's a very good possibility they do trade Karlsson's rights because in the NHL, you are permitted to trade a guy's rights, before July 1st. So basically that team gets an exclusive, negotiating window without talking to other teams. I think that may happen with Karlsson. But as far as Donkey goes, like I said, I could see him returning just because it's not going to cost very much, but I think the days of him hoping he's going to establish himself as a top 6 or even top 9 guy are probably gone at this point.
Yeah. When that line was hot, he looked a lot better, but then he went on just a huge streak. So, like I said, I like Donskoy. I like a guy who works hard, and I think even when he's not scoring goals, he's out there working hard. But it's tough to keep him around, especially if, I don't know. They're not paying him much though. What, he's at 1.9?
Yeah, and I don't think he's going to get much more than that. I mean,
that's the thing is, I think that might become like you said, the big thing for Doug Wilson is if you can get Donskoy for 1.9,
great.
Maybe you keep him because he's a 3rd, 4th liner.
He's good value for the money, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, if he does return, he needs to really work on his strength in the offseason. I know he's a small guy, but we talked about Pavelski getting that front presence earlier. Pavelski's probably the smallest guy on the team, and he manages to. So it can be addressed, but right now he gets pushed off the puck way too easily, and he's great with the puck, but it's too easy to get the puck off him because he's too easy to push around.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say Steve's got a question that we're actually going to get to in a little bit here, but do we think that it says, do you guys think we have too many mid-weights, need a big man on cleanup after kind of like clean up all those dirty goals around the net and stuff? Yes. We're going to get into that, but yes, definitely size is an issue here too, right?
John's got a good comment too, saying that in reference to Donskoy, he thinks one of the younger guys currently playing in junior hockey will get a chance. I agree. Ivan Shikovic almost made the team out of training camp last year. Keep an eye on him. And then Chmelevski as well is definitely a possibility. And as the Sharks get tighter and tighter on cap space, that's when you have to integrate those young guys that are making, $700,000-800,000 to fill out your roster.
And that is an excellent point, right? So while I like Donskoy, I don't necessarily think he's better than those guys. And so if you can get those guys, if you give them a chance and they prove to be as good as we kind of think they're going to be, then they can replace Jonas Donskoy.
Well, that kind of addresses your question too about what would plug into the top 6 or top 9. Typically, Wilson and the Sharks have not implemented young players on the 4th line because you're not really going to develop on a 4th line. So if young guys make the team, they typically want to put them in a position to succeed. So that's where one of those guys could end up potentially, at least to start the season like we saw with Suomela before he fizzled out.
And then the next two, to me, are both no-brainers, but let's do one at a time. Sure. And the no-brainers in opposite directions. So first, Tim Heed. I think Tim Heed stays. I think he's shown over the course of the season when he's come in and played. He plays incredibly well with Vlasic. And I think, I don't know, you, I think, agree with me, but I don't think Braun comes back.
We'll get to that in a second.
So I think that you keep Tim Heed and you pair him up with Vlasic, which looked good to me this season when they did it. He came into playoffs after not having played any games and had a very good game, honestly, in a bad game 6 total, but I think he played very well. And I think you sign him pretty easily.
I'm not a big Tim Heed fan personally. I don't really care for him, but I do think he returns because I think the organization is higher on him than I am personally. And again, he's a cheap option that's probably not going to cost them much. And they've got equity built up in him, right? They know him. They know his game as compared to bringing in someone from the outside of a similar skill set and at a similar point in their career that you don't know. You know what you have in Heed, or at least you think you do. So I do think he returns, even though I'm not a personal big fan of him.
Now, do you like him better than Ryan?
To me, it depends what you're looking for. If you want a better defenseman, I much prefer Ryan. If you want more offense, then Heed is the better option.
See, I don't agree with you.
Well, here's my thing. I think, well, first of all, I guess we'll jump ahead to Ryan. I don't think Ryan comes back because DeBoer has a personal issue with him, it seems, because he never plays. But I think Ryan would be fine if he wasn't playing with Burns. I think Burns and Ryan together is not a good option. But to me, Ryan has a lot of similar traits to Vlasic, or at least could develop into. He's never going to be as good as Vlasic is, but I think he has some of the similar traits as Vlasic does in terms of his stick work and his defensive awareness. I know a lot of Sharks fans are sort of over Ryan, but I think he's a much better player than
I feel like
shown, and I think a lot of that is because the coaching staff doesn't believe in him.
I feel like we've seen totally different games out of Ryan then, because I don't feel like Ryan's strong defensively at all. I don't feel like he's strong offensively. That's kind of my thing about him is I think he's average at defense and not impressive on offense. So, I mean, I think you could stick him with Vlasic, or because you could stick almost anybody with Vlasic. But I hate him with Burns. There's only one guy who should ever play paired up with Burns, and he's currently injured, so hopefully he comes back.
Yeah. I mean, I thought the Burns and Vlasic pair was excellent for most of these playoffs. I mean, they'll go back to Burns and Shinnick now, but if somebody goes down again, that's a good option.
Burns and Vlasic looked better this playoff season, playoffs, than it's ever looked before, because they've tried that experiment numerous times, and I've hated it. But I don't know if it was just out of necessity. It was a better pairing for sure in the playoffs.
John says he thinks there's a chance both don't come back. I'm assuming he means Ryan and Heed. I would say that's possible. The reason I don't think that is the case, though, is just because, again, they're going to need cheap guys with depth, and typically you're going to prefer guys that you have experience with compared to somebody from the outside that you don't know as well. Middleton could certainly step in and be a factor as well, but I think the Sharks believe in Tim Heed more than a lot of people do.
I think, and when we talk about cost, if you double Heed's salary, you're paying him $1.2 million. So, I mean, he's a very cheap guy to bring back that I think plays above his pay grade. Whether you think he's necessarily the best, defenseman on the ice, I think he definitely plays above what he's paid.
It's funny. I thought he was much better last year than this year. Granted, he got more of an opportunity last year, but last year his shot was very effective on the power play. I think, obviously, when Karlsson came in this year, I mean, he's basically useless unless Karlsson's hurt, because you've got two offensive dynamo and Burns and Karlsson. His role is kind of unnecessary at that point. But assuming Karlsson leaves, he could see a bigger opportunity for sure.
We'll see. That's an interesting one, because I also think that while I think that you're right that Doug previously had an issue with Ryan, I think that doesn't show itself as much this season. Ryan got a lot more playing time. Sorry, DeBoer. Ryan
he was kind of forced to, right? Because they had nobody left. I mean, Shinnick was out, Karlsson was out, Vlasic was out for some time. So, and granted, he did play him over Heed in the playoffs, but DeBoer, he loves the righty-lefty pair, and that would have been an option with Heed. So.
Yeah, I think Middleton will see some ice time next season.
Yeah, he'll definitely get a shot. But
I just don't think they're.
Regularly.
Yeah,
he'll
I'm
be
not
like
sure.
the seventh defenseman, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're ready to make him a permanent fixture.
No, he'll take the role that DeMello and Heath and Ryan started out when they first came on board. Sort of plug him in when somebody's hurt, but he's not missing regular time.
Yeah, exactly. And then the last one, who's UFA, we agree on, but I know for a fact that the Shark fans don't agree on. So Michael Haley, I wouldn't sign him if he was $2. I just
yeah, and I don't think they bring him back. I mean, last time he was a free agent, they didn't bring him back. I don't see that changing this time either. But I hope we're correct. I hope Doug doesn't decide to keep him. I know the guys love him, so there's definitely a possibility he returns because of that. But I think it's time to let that.
I'd rather see them bring John Scott out of retirement than sign Michael Haley.
Which I don't know if you read and heard about that. John Scott was going to open the doors for Game 7. He announced that on his Twitter, so that made it even more sour that Sharks couldn't get it to a Game 7. Apparently, he had planned a pop-up speech for the boys as well, which if you listen to his podcast, he kind of previews that. But
And I want to go back to, I want to be clear. So going back to what Steve asked before, it's not that we don't think there needs to be a physical guy, a bigger guy who's out there laying hits or willing to take bites, or it's not that we don't think we need that guy. It's that we want that guy to also be good at playing hockey. We want
someone in the mold of, you're not going to get somebody this good, but someone like Timo or Kane, even Hurdle. But I think even more physical than those guys are. Other than maybe Kane is probably as physical as you kind of hope for, but someone in that mold who probably isn't as skilled as those guys, but their game is built around physicality. Kind of like almost I'd go back to Tommy Winkles or Jamie McGinn. Both of those guys were always near the top of the team in hits. I think they probably were more skilled than either of those guys had, but similar type to that is, I think, to me, would be one of my number one offseason targets. Is trying to find a guy who plays that style.
If Doug's listening, I've got a McGinn jersey still in my closet that I'd love to bring out and dust off.
Did he score against the Sharks at the end of the regular season?
Yeah.
I think I remember.
Well, and he seems to be the least talented of his brothers too. So
they even had one of his brothers for one season, time again.
But yeah, I agree. I think someone like that who has a little more talent, but is still going to go out there and be physical and lay hits and willing to sit in the box when they need to.
And we'll get into specific names here in a second. Yeah.
All right, so that's the unrestricted free agents.
So restricted free agents, the two big ones are Timo and the bank. We're not even going to debate whether they come back. I think it's obvious both of them return. It's just for how much money. Timo, to me, is going to be other than Pavelski, will be Wilson's most difficult negotiation. It'll be interesting. A lot of the young guys that have gone to RFA lately have had some interesting situations. We saw Mitch Marner hold out, or William Nylander rather, hold out in Toronto this year, and that was a whole circus that lasted into the regular season. And he got paid a shit ton of money and had a terrible season. I don't see Timo going that route. He's not that type of guy, but it's going to be interesting whether they do a short-term deal or if they try to go long-term. Ideally, you try to go long-term, but how much is it going to cost you if you do?
Yeah, he's under $1 million right now. He's got a payday coming. There's no way he signs anywhere near where he's at right now.
No, I'd say he's going to fall somewhere in the 5 to 7 range, personally.
Yeah, I think if you can get him to sign a max contract for $5 million, I think you do it.
Oh, they'd be all over that for sure.
Yeah, I think if he's smart, he doesn't sign anything more than 2-3 years, because
in 3 years from now, he doesn't get paid back if he keeps emerging like he has. This year.
So I guess part of it comes down to a question of how good of an agent does he have, or how good of advice is he receiving,
and how selfish. Well, I'm going to say selfish. How smart is he?
Yeah, it's easy to say someone's selfish, right? But
you're looking out for your own interest.
This is their career. It's not something they do just for fun. So I never hold it against a guy who thinks he's worth more money and goes and gets it somewhere else. It breaks my heart, when it happens. Marlowe leaving was rough, but the guy got more money and a longer contract, so I don't blame him for doing it. But yeah, I think they find a way to make it work.
Yeah, I think he probably maybe they go 4 years. He probably doesn't want to go more than 3, but I think the Sharks try to get 4 out of him, and I'll say 4 years at $5.5 million per is my guess.
And I'm not a huge LeBanc fan, so
You should be after this year. He really turned it on the last couple of months and sort of found his game.
Yeah, I see him. I mean, I think he has some of Donskoy's issues, where he gets streaky. But I think that just like DeBoer doesn't like Ryan, I think DeBoer loves Kevin LeBanc, and so I think he comes back.
I don't think he did initially. I think he does now, but it took some. I mean, because there was always those quotes about, we got to trust him, in the final 2 minutes and all that crap. But the one thing I'll say about LeBanc, if you were to measure Sharks forwards just in terms of pure talent and skill level, he would be near the top of the list.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I would even say he's got more skill than Logan does in terms of just pure skill. Obviously, he doesn't have the hockey sense, the smarts, the work ethic, all that type of stuff. But in terms of just pure talent, in terms of shooting the puck and passing the puck, he's near the top of the roster, if not at the top. In terms
he's up there. Yeah,
he's top talent.
He's top 3 for sure, right? I mean, yeah, I agree. It's just a matter of can he get that hockey sense, and how long does it take him to get that hockey sense? And
I don't know if his brain matches up to his hands. But
how much does it cost to keep him around to do that is the other question, right? So I don't know what's he making now.
I think he ends up in probably the $3 to $4 million range. Hopefully more towards the $3 million range. But last year he came in at, granted these are pre-arbitration contracts, he was at $700,000. So I mean, he's got the standard entry-level contract. He was never able to negotiate anything more than that until now. But you look at his numbers, I mean, he put up, 56 points this year. I mean, 17 goals, 39 assists. That's good production.
How many of those were on power play?
Probably a good chunk, and I'll have it offhand here.
Yeah, that's my thing is 5-on-5. He's not as impressive to me.
No, he got better as the year went on. I mean, he scored some sick 5-on-5 goals in the playoffs.
But I agree with you. I think both of them get signed. I think that squeezes Jumbo, and it squeezes how much there can give Pavelski, because you don't want to make you don't want to get rid of the younger guys to keep Pavelski on the roster necessarily.
Yeah. So John asked, what did Dell make this year? Dell's at $1.9 million. We're going to talk about him here in a moment, actually. So the other RFAs, so we both agree, Timo and LeBanc will return. It's just a matter of how much money. Joaquin Ryan, I think probably departs. There's a chance he returns, but I think he's more likely gone than not. Dylan Gambrell will definitely be back. I think he could see a regular spot. His best game as an NHLer was Sharks' last game of the season. He hadn't really shown much up until then, but he'll definitely get a shot next year, if not as fourth-line center, maybe even third-line center, which really was the role that they hoped he would take on this year, but it never happened. So he'll get a chance. And then the next thing we were going to go into was, as John kind of segued into, is potential trade bait. And entirely because of what you said, John, is cap-wise, they're going to have to move some money out most likely. Even to just, let's say they just retain Pavelski, Meyer, LeBanc, and maybe bring in one other free agent. They're going to have to move some money out. So our top 3 candidates for that are Justin Braun, who's at $3.8 million, Melker Karlsson, who's at $2 million, and then Aaron Dell at $1.9 million. All those guys are only signed for next year. They're free agents after that. So.
Yeah, I think Braun's gone. I think you run into some problems if Braun and Karlsson are gone, because then you have to kind of find, you've got Heed to play for Braun. You got to figure out what you do for Karlsson.
Well, you think about that. Let's say they do that. I mean, then you got Vlasic, Burns, Schmick, and Dillon. You're 4 for sure that are in the lineup, right? So then you got 2 spots left to fill. you assume he takes one of those, and then they probably have to sign a free agent at that point.
I think it's sign a free agent. I don't think Ryan stays, so I think you have to pick someone up. And we can kind of talk about next. We'll talk about a little bit who would the Sharks be looking for to fill some of these positions. But Karlsson, I think Karlsson's gone. Michael Karlsson. I like him, but I don't like him enough to pay him $2 million to stick around.
Yeah, well, and I think that's going to be the hard part. I don't know if anyone's willing to take on that contract, but if they can move him, I think you can say goodbye. I don't know if anyone will be willing to take him, but if they can convince somebody to, then they'll definitely move that salary out.
And then I think Dell's gone. I think all three of these guys are traded, honestly. Dell, because I think we have AHL goalies who are as good as Dell. And we have a nice thing if we have two of them. So we can try one out, and if they don't work, we can try another one out. And they can compete for the position, which always only ends up better to me when you have two guys competing. But
I think Dell's probably going to. It's unfortunate that his last memory as a Shark will be fighting a teammate in practice, but that's the way it goes.
We never heard anything about, but
no, just saw the video.
John asked, any chance they dangle Kane as trade bait? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. First of all, I don't think anyone would take that contract, and I think they're committed to Kane. And I don't know if he has I'll look and see if he has a no-move clause, but go ahead, Jim.
I also think I think a lot of his play in the playoffs we chalked up to not just previously having an injury, but his issues with his family. I think he's not mentally fully in the game for the playoffs, and I think they give him some leeway for that and assume he'll be back next year the way he was this year. So during the season,
I want to make a comment on that because I've brought that up to numerous people because Kane probably took more heat on Twitter during his postseason than any other Shark. And rightfully so, if you look at his performance. But the whole losing a child thing, I saw a lot of people saying, well, if his head's not in the game, then he should sit out and know that. Nobody's going to fucking sit out that's healthy. I mean, that's an unrealistic expectation. Regardless of whether his head's in the right place or not, he's going to play. No one's going to sit out who's healthy. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just ridiculous, right? No pro athlete is going to be like, my head's just not in it. I'm going to sit out the entire playoff.
Yeah. I mean, maybe take a week or two to deal with it like he did during the regular season, but no,
so I think they give him a pass, and I don't think they seriously consider moving him. They just assume he's going to come back next season and play the way he did this season. So,
and he does have a modified no trade clause. He can submit a list of 3 teams that he can be traded to. So, even if they wanted to trade him, the no move clause makes it difficult, and then his salary, good luck. I mean, basically, you would be giving him away just to shed the contract. You wouldn't be getting anything back in value.
Yeah, and there's still some bad taste out there in people's mouths for him as well. There's still teams, I think, that wouldn't want him just because they see him as.
He's got off the ice questions.
Yeah, his off the ice
other people are concerned.
But yeah, I think Dell, Braun, and Karlsson go, which is, I mean, that's if we can get rid of them without paying any of their contract, you're talking what, 7.8 million, 7.7 million that you free up to sign some of the other guys and bring some young talent up or try and find some deals out on the market.
Yeah, and I think Wilson will probably look at the trade market more than free agency just because cap-wise they don't have much money to spend on free agency. So he's going to have to work some magic with limited ammunition to try to bring in some cheaper guys to trade that can fill some of those spots. But
that being said, it's Doug Wilson. So I said that being said, it's Doug Wilson. So who knows?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to pull another Erik Karlsson out of his hat, but we'll see. The last thing I was going to mention, I know a lot of people, I'm surprised nobody's mentioned in the chat, are, is it time to move on from Martin Jones? Well, first of all, you're not going to because you can't.
Yeah.
No, again, same thing as Kane. No one's taking that contract. So for better or worse, you're stuck with him. I feel a lot better about it now after the playoffs because I think he's shown that he's not nearly as bad as he was in the regular season. I wouldn't say that's eliminated all the questions, but you're not going to be able to get rid of that contract.
Yeah, there's just some question of what was up before that, right? Like what I don't know if it was a confidence thing. Certainly he should come out of this playoffs with a ton of confidence. I mean, he he kept us in the playoffs multiple times. He kept us in games. He kept us in series. We were saying this earlier on, even when I thought we should trade him, we weren't going to be able to. There was no one that was going to take him, and he's franchised at this point for at least a few years. So I don't think he goes anywhere, and I think that we come back with some confidence. I also think that if the guys that we bring in to replace Dell play really well, I think that lights a little bit of fire under him too, and maybe we see a better regular season with him.
Yeah, I mean, you could see, especially because we're assuming Bebo or Coronor will probably be the backup. Bebo's a little bit older. He's been in the minors quite a while, bouncing around different organizations. Coronor is young enough to where, if he stepped forward and played as well as he could for the Barracuda, there's someone who could, potentially take Jones's job at some point in the future. I'm not going to say next season, but
sure.
Could turn into the following season after that. There could be an open competition if he plays well.
But DeBoer's known for playing a hot hand. I mean, if Jones is struggling and he comes in and plays well, DeBoer will keep playing him. Not that I think he would. I don't think he'll take his job, but I do think that
not next season, but maybe long term, possibly. Okay.
All right, so let's talk about what we need then. So let's say everything we've predicted.
I want to ask one question. This is kind of a future question, a question for next offseason, but the expansion draft will be an issue next offseason.
Don't protect Jones.
That's exactly where I was going. Hypothetically, let's say Corner shows promise. I think you expose Jones because nobody's going to probably take him anyway. But I don't know if Doug Wilson would have the balls to make that public statement to throw him out there. And then, hey, if they take him, thanks. Have that contract and have fun.
Yeah, I definitely think you expose him at that point. Again, I mean, it does rely on AHL is not necessarily a predictor for how someone will play in the NHL. Yeah. So it does rely on them showing up and showing that they can play at that level. But yeah, I think you hope.
Honestly, unless Jones has a great season, I'd probably expose him regardless. And then if somebody takes him, hey, figure it out from there.
Well, because it becomes the question of you can protect more guys if you leave Jones exposed, right?
Well, either way, you have to expose one goalie and protect one, I believe. So, I mean, it's probably not going to matter because it's unlikely to get taken. But and I think they'll probably protect him just out of ego. But
I wouldn't. But I mean, I wouldn't protect him because
in the off chance they decide to take him, thank you very much.
So, they need two goalies, right? I mean, maybe they take him as a backup.
And he would probably. I mean, it's hard to predict a year from now, but he'd probably be the best goalie available, I would think. Most likely.
Unless Fleury's somehow available again. He'll just move from expansion team to expansion team. All right, so if all our predictions come true, we need a defenseman, and I'm going to say we need a third line center. What else do we need, you think?
Well, I think one defenseman and one forward. I don't think it necessarily has to be a center because Thornton can hold down that third line center spot if they need to. I think Suomela will get a shot to recapture that as well. Gambriel might get a shot at that too. But your top two centers will be Logan and Hurdle, obviously. The wingers, I mean, you can mix and match between Meyer and LeBanc, Sorensen, Kane, Pavelski, assuming he comes back. Those guys can filter around the top six. But I think one defenseman and one forward. And as we talked about earlier, I would like to see a bigger body come in who plays physical. I think a guy that would be a perfect fit. I don't know if they'll be able to afford him because there'll be a lot of competition. It'll be Kevin Hayes just because of his size and versatility. He can play center if you need him to. He's a bigger body, definitely a net front presence. He's kind of people call Pavelski a Swiss Army knife, and Hayes is very similar to that in terms of being a versatile player.
I agree. I mean, Hayes was on my short list. Hayes and Nyquist were the two on my list for
trade
deadline. And I preferred Hayes just because I thought that center position was something we needed more than a winger. From what I've been reading, chances are Winnipeg's not going to re-sign him. but there's also a number of teams that are interested in him because I think he's, like you said, he's a good tool to have.
Yeah, there will be a long list of teams after him for sure.
Yeah, but he's over $5 million. He's 5'1", I think. So again, it becomes a question of cap. Can you afford to bring him in, or are you better off just saying jumbo play center? And
realistically, they probably can't, but I mean, it depends on what else happens, obviously.
If there's a Doug Wilson pulling off something, I would like to see getting Hayes. I think he'd be a good fit. He'd be that physical guy that we're looking for, and he could play third line center, and Jumbo could play fourth. And I think you're in a good spot.
Yeah. As far as defense goes, I think you're looking probably at the trade route. The only free agent defenseman out there besides Eric Karlsson that are even worse, considering Alex Edler from Vancouver. He's 33 years old, kind of at the end of his career, and everything we've heard about others, he's pretty much in the Joe Thornton route of Vancouver or nowhere. Tyler Myers, interesting piece from Winnipeg, but probably out of the Sharks' budget.
Jacob Truba.
Truba would be a hell of an ad, but he's going to want big money.
Yeah, he's expensive. That's the problem.
Yeah. And then Jake Gardner of Toronto had a disappointing year, but all those guys are probably going to be out of their budget. I mean, you could look at it and say, well, Karlsson's money's gone. They can afford another big money defenseman, but that's ignoring all the other holes they got to fill. So,
what about someone like Ryan Murray? Or I mean, are those guys? They're cheaper. Are they good enough to?
Well, that's where I need to go back to what I said earlier. They're going to lean on guys they already know, like Tim Heed. Even some of the Barracuda, Jeremy Waugh or Roy, however the fuck you pronounce it, could be an option if he stays healthy. Their second round pick from a few years ago, who they expected a lot from, but he's had injury problems every year. So it could be. This is probably what's most likely to happen. They'll probably fill the 5th and 6th D slots internally, and then at the trade deadline, if they feel like they need to add a defenseman, then they'll try to add one then. And that also helps your cap situation if you're only paying the guy for half of his salary.
Yeah.
So I could see that being a trade deadline target, adding another defenseman.
I agree. I think actually for both they might do that. I think for they have a lot of forwards. I think that they just try to run with what they have, unless there's some deal out there, right? Like there's some when they go to trade Braun and Dell and stuff. Unless there's some great deal out there, I think they run with what they have, and they use that salary cap to re-sign the guys that they need. And then, like you said, Wilson shines at the trade deadline. So I think you say, okay, do we have a chance to run for the cup? And if yes, then what do we need in order to do that? They look back kind of and make those decisions.
Yeah, I think the young guys get a lot of opportunity this year, and if they don't fill the spots they need to, then they can address it at the deadline, where you'll have more cap space than you would for the whole season. Yeah. And Tiffany comments on being attached to Jumbo, Burns, and Pavelski. Well, good news, Tiffany. I expect all three of those guys to be back there, obviously. The ones that will be tough to go if they do go are Donskoy. And Braun's not a huge fan favorite. I think he's probably the most underappreciated Shark, but he's one of those heart and soul type guys that you certainly appreciate.
He's the funniest guy on the team, apparently. Did you see that?
I heard that,
yeah.
It was Vlasic that said that, right?
Vlasic and Burns. So Burns said it, and then Vlasic was like, "Yeah, that's a good choice."
It's kind of, I think it's one of those things where you don't expect it from someone, therefore they're funnier just because you don't expect it. So.
All right. Well, it's been. Do you have anything else?
Nope. Well, I'll throw one thing out there. If Doug Wilson pulls off another blockbuster trade this summer, I'm going to say it's for PK Subban, but I don't think that happens. But just throwing it out there in case it does.
I'd still love to see him, I'd love to see him come, but I don't think that's going to happen either. So
I think it'd be the perfect replacement for Karlsson, but very unlikely that, number one, the Nashville moves him, and number two, they move him to a conference rival who they're going to be competing against.
But his hat and suit game are on point. He'd fit in very well with the...
Lindsey Vonn can join the Sharks' girlfriend/wives club.
There you go. All right, and with that note, So this is probably the last show we're gonna have for a while. We'll obviously come back and do a show when people start signing and we know more about it.
I'd say probably July 1st, no talking free agent signed, so probably a few days after that, we'll join you guys as soon as Sharks have done anything worthy of talking about.
Yeah. But until then, enjoy the off season. I'm going to do all the things I was supposed to do during the playoffs, yard work and everything else. And thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate having you guys around and look forward to seeing you around in the future.
See you later.